Great to see everybody. Thanks for being here. So some of you are well versed in what I'm going to talk about, others less so, and it's a really valuable part of eState on the efficiency side to use our macros and our ePlans and to shortcut what would take a few minutes and do it in a second instead. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going on things, and then of course we'll open the floor to any questions about eState and we'll go from there. So few features that we're showing you today are our shortcut features. One of them is our macros, and I'll talk about macros in a second. The other one is our ePlan, which is kind of a combination of macros in one. So I will just go to our main page here, and you'll see a tab for macros. The short explanation of macros is it's just a pre-canned residue gift. Okay, so it's typical residue gifts that you might use frequently, that rather than you having to construct it from scratch, you click a button and it does it automatically. Okay, so you'll see there's a bunch. I have these custom ones. You can ignore those for now because you don't probably have them, because you can create your own macros. If there's a typical residue distribution that you do, you can create a macro to do that on your own. It can be yours personally, and you can have as many of those as you want. But let me just show you a very simple example of a macro. So these are the ones that come with eState automatically, because I picked basically this sort of typical ones. So we have a few for children, and I'll just click on one to give you an example of that. So this is the one that we call the Children Trust No Stages Entire Residue. So what is this doing? This is giving 100% of the residue equally to children in a trust to age 30 with no interim mandatory payments, full discretion, and then a gift over to their issue. Okay, so that's what it's doing. And basically you can see it's like a little residue gift here that we can edit. And this is the beneficiaries are children. The gift type is a trust. It's divided equally with the same executors as same trustees as executors. We have the duration, we have mandatory, just the way you'd set up your regular gift. Okay. The good thing about this is we can use this automatically in any residue scenario, and it will automatically create that gift that you just saw automatically without having to do it manually. So we have a bunch of them. We have a bunch of options for children's gifts in trusts. We did one with no stages, one with two-stage, so one interim distribution, one with two interim distributions and a final. We have absolute gift to spouse, which is your typical one. We have a qualifying spousal trust one, if you're ever doing that. Rather than having to click all the different buttons, click on that and it'll automatically generate the plan for a qualifying spousal trust. The other ones we built in were just ones that I use regularly, where we're giving, for example, 50% to the spouse's siblings, 50% to my siblings, nieces and nephews. So those are just the common ones. But as I said, you can create your own, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So how do you use them? They're there, but how do you use them? Well, let's go to a client. Let's just go to Homer again. And so we're here in scenario one, and we want to create a residue clause. So you'll see in the residue clause this run macro button. So if I hit that, rather than creating a gift here, I can just hit the run macro button, and up come all of my macros, not only the standard ones, but any custom ones that I've done. And all I have to do in this surviving spouse scenario, I'm probably going to give it either to the spouse entirely or to the spouse in a qualifying spousal trust. I'm just going to demonstrate how I do that. I'm just going to, okay, your instructions are everything to the spouse in a qualifying spousal trust. All I do, click this button, execute, and eState did all that. So then you can go into the gift itself. It's as if you had done this manually. You can go in here and change anything you want. So this did a qualifying spousal trust with unlimited discretionary payments, but maybe the client says, no, I don't want any capital distributions for the spousal trust. Well, you can go in there and make whatever changes you want to it after you've created that macro, but it did save all the time of creating that macro or that gift. The next one, maybe we go to the children's gift, and I use this all the time. I'll say, okay, run macro, because the client says, I want a 2-stage distribution, okay? Or I want to, all in a trust for the kids, right? I'm just going to click that one, the simplest one, no interim distributions. I'm just going to execute. Well, then I can go in here and I can change things around. So this one happened to be, I picked the absolute one. Let me just get rid of that and do the run the macro and do a trust no stage distribution. So this is the one I meant. So it's going to the children in a trust when 30, but the client's instructions are no, hold it till they're 28. Okay, no problem. Just go in and make whatever manual changes you want to that macro. Okay, so it gives you the base starting point, but you can always amend it as in the gift here. Okay, so that's how you would do that. So it's a great way to just create residue gifts very simply. And for example, if I was going to the no descendants and the instructions were, I'll give you the instructions. The instructions were 50% to siblings, okay, with no strings, and 50% to spouses, nieces, and nephews. Well, I just click the 2 different macros. I'll maybe just show you how I did that. So a little slower. I'm going to say 50% to my siblings. I just click on that macro and execute, and that's what it did. And then I run the second macro, which is my spouse's nieces and nephews. Click on that, execute that, and it does it. Now let's say, right, I can always switch it from percentages to parts once I've done it. So if I want to do something fancier or add another gift for a different amount, I could change it to parts, and then I could add it, because there's no limit to how many parts you could have, right? And we can talk some more about that. I think we've done that before about residue gifts, but you can do that. You can create the macro. It's done by percentages, but then you can change it any way you want. So, and again, you can go into any of these gifts and change it from what the macro did and manually change anything in here. Okay. So just to go back for a second and show you how do you create your own macro. So let's say there's a gift that you use regularly. Okay, I'm going to create one for kids. That's probably the simplest one. So I'm going to click add. Okay, and up comes this box, and I need to name this. So this is children trust. This is just how I'm naming it. You can name it any way you want. Age 28 with plus 25% at 25. Okay, go. So the gift over to beneficiary issue, something like that. I can call it anything I want. And so let's now create that. Okay, so I'm going to add a gift down here, like you're building a residue gift. You're going to add a gift, and you're going to pick class. You can't pick a person, obviously, because this has to work in any client's plan. So you can only pick classes. So let's pick children, and we're going to make it a trust gift for the children, and we're going to make it divided equally, and we're going to have the same trustees, and we're going to add the duration. I think we said, what did we say? 20, I think we said 28 for the age of the beneficiary, but then we had a mandatory payment, right, of age 25. We had percentage of 25%. So we're creating this common one that we're going to use again and again, and we're going to pick the gift over to beneficiaries issue. Well, by doing that, and you could do it as parts or percentages, whatever you pick. This is going to be 100%, so I'm going to use 100%. That makes the most sense. And now there it is. So it's now available. It's now available to be used on any client. So if I go to Nick Scott and I'm creating the descendants only scenario, and I'll just clear this for a second and remove that. And I'm going to use my own brand new macro down here, and it'll do it. Boom, done. And I can keep those macros. So if there's common gifts that you use over and over, just set up a macro for that, and just reuse it whenever you need to, and name it so you can identify it. Doesn't matter how you name it, but it'll be available to you. So, and that's how you can shortcut. Often we all have sort of our preferences for typical distributions. Set that up as a macro so it's there all the time, and then you don't have to manually change anything or add it. So those are macros, and they're for residue gifts only. Then we have, and most of you will know about ePlans. So I'm going to go back to our Homer Simpson person, and so here we are, and I'll explain sort of how I use ePlans and what they were intended to do. ePlans are a whole collection of gifts for both spouses that are done automatically with one click. Okay, so the ePlan button is the lightning bolt. And so if your instructions are, for example, your typical everything to the spouse, then to the kids in trust, then 50-50 to siblings and spouses, siblings in the ultimate distribution, an ePlan will do that automatically for both spouses with a click of the button. So let's start from scratch. And so we're clear here. So what I'll do, if I wanted to create a typical plan for my clients, all I would do is I click the ePlan button, the lightning bolt. And here are my ePlans. Now, these are not customizable because they're quite complex. And so they're fixed and they can't be customized yet. But let's take the typical one. Here are your typical ones. Spouse with adult children. Well, what's it going to do? Well, in the surviving spouse scenario, it's going to make the sole estate trustee and sole beneficiary the spouse. In the descendants only, it's going to make the children, because they're adults, as the sole estate trustee and sole beneficiaries. In the no descendants, it's going to say half to each set of siblings. And the powers of attorney are going to make it spouse first and then the children collectively. So that's what it's going to do automatically. If I click that button, then there's different ones for spouse with younger children. Well, here's a trust, surviving spouse, everything absolute, then descendants only, children as sole beneficiaries in a trust to age 25, no descendants to each set of siblings, and POA, spouse first, no alternate, because we don't know who you're going to pick. So it'll do a lot of your work for you. And so I'm just going to click on spouse, pretend we have adult children. I click on that and it's done. So what did it do? For both spouses, it went through all of the assets and it figured out all of the joint assets and all of the assets where you could designate a beneficiary. And it designated the spouse as the beneficiary automatically. Okay. Then what it did is it gave all the personal effects to the spouse and all the loyalty points, if any, to the spouse. Okay. And then it gave the residue to the spouse, absolutely. And it did that for both spouses automatically. Okay, so you don't have to do one for each spouse. Then what it did was, in the descendants only, we picked the absolute gift. It split all the personal effects among the kids, the loyalty points to the kids, and if any, and the residue to the kids absolutely with a gift over to issue. Okay, so it did your typical plan. And in the third scenario, it split everything 50-50 between siblings and spouses' siblings with gift overs to issue. It automatically appointed the spouse and any child. So it checks to see, are there children over 18? In this case, there were no children over 18, so it didn't print them. If it did, they would have listed all of the children over 18. And similarly for the powers of attorney. It knows that you can't appoint people under 18, so it's not going to list them. But if eState saw that your children were over 18, it would have automatically listed them as the alternate executors and trustees and attorneys for power of attorney, property and personal care. So I often we'll get a sense from the client, just talking, not doing anything in eState necessarily, get a sense from them. What are they planning? They're planning everything to the spouse. Then I know we're going to have kids, trust for kids, because they've got young kids. So once I've established that, then I'll click on that ePlan, generate it automatically, and say to the client, okay, now let's get some more details. Maybe we want to change the age of distribution. Maybe we want to change the stage distributions. Because again, all eState did was generate these gifts, but you can go in and change anything you want, right? They're just pre-canned gifts that can be customized for your particular circumstance. And that's the idea. And really, I use that almost every time to at least give me a plan that I can then work with and massage and take the client's instructions and say, no, we don't want to leave it to 50-50 to siblings. We want to add other gifts, or we want to add initial gifts in here, or we want to split this in a different percentage and add a third to charity. Then let me just, we want to give some, a third of it to this charity. Okay, well, we can edit that, no problem. But it gives you the framework, and it does it for both spouses. So that's the benefit there. So I just want to open the floor to any questions, and then I want to show one other thing that sometimes people aren't aware of, another feature and safety feature, really. Any questions about how you use macros or ePlans for eState?
Jordy?
Yeah. Hey, Tim.
Would they work with if you just had one spouse, like as a widow?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. It won't have a surviving spouse scenario. So you can pick those. Yeah. You want it all to the kids kind of thing. What we typically, I might do that, just, you can use a macro or you can use an ePlan, either way. Yeah.
The other question I had, I don't know if you want to deal with it now, was what about a client came in and they had an RESP?
Yep.
Is there any resource on how to deal with that?
Yep, sure. Let's talk about an RESP. So one of the things you'll note is if the client has school-age kids like Homer and they haven't listed an RESP, eState warns you about that and says, just check with them if they maybe they haven't opened up one yet, but they're going to, or they forgot or whatever. So it's going to say, is an RESP possible? But as an example, let's add an RESP here. Okay, so the client has an RESP, and the way I typically deal with it is I will, in the surviving spouse scenario, I will often, even if it was joint, I would still put it in initial gifts, because I want it to show up in the will because they might have future RESPs or that aren't joint. And so what I prefer to do is I would name the spouse as the beneficiary, in essence, the beneficiary of the RESP. And then in the descendants only, I would name the kids as the beneficiary of the RESP, okay? Like that. So what eState would do here, and I'll just show you in a single will, let's say, it's going to draft the appropriate clauses based on that. So let's go down here. Sorry. There's an RESP clause, okay? So here's the RESP clause, and it says, I appoint my spouse as the successor subscriber of any RESP plan of which I'm the sole surviving subscriber at my death. If it was joint, then this wouldn't apply because you weren't the sole surviving subscriber. But if you are, then that's the case. If my spouse is not alive and I'm the sole remaining subscriber, this is the gift to children. And if any of my children qualify, then I direct my trustee to take the steps. Because we need a successor subscriber to the RESP, then we appoint the trustees to be that successor subscriber. And that's how eState deals with it. And because we do need a successor subscriber to an RESP. And it goes on to say, take whatever steps are necessary to keep the RESP, and then you can also make contributions. This is pretty important as well. Typically, the children's lawyer does not like children's money going into an RESP because they're concerned that it might, if they don't use it, it might not ultimately go to them. It might go to the subscriber. So what we do is we put in a clause that says, consider it to be for the benefit of the RESP subscriber, our contribution. So it just gives some protection to the trustee to do that. And then basically, when nobody can still, no one would qualify, just have it fall into the residue of the estate. So that's how our RESP. And the way you do that is you use initial gifts in scenario 1 of the RESP to the spouse, and in scenario 2 to the children, or whoever the other any qualifying people that you'd want the RESP for.
Thanks, Jody. I wasn't aware that they could be joint. Like usually registered assets were always like sold.
Yeah, RESPs are not like our RSPs, for example. They're a different beast. They're and so they have different rules that are very complicated in many ways. So it's not like an RSP.
Okay.
And yes, you can have joint subscribers.
Okay, thanks.
Jordy, John Dunn here.
Hi, John.
If we have a scenario where you have two spouses, there's been prior relationships, and let's say one spouse has kids, the other spouse does not. And what would be the most efficient way to work out the will plan for those people?
Well, I would do that one manually for sure, and make sure you name people and don't use classes, because you don't want to have anybody arguing that when you said children, even though we use definitions, I mean, we automatically include definitions. You can, of course, remove them, et cetera. But I would always name them specifically, and do a bespoke planning for them, as opposed to using a macro that uses class gifts.
Right. So you don't think there's some instances you might, if one spouse wants to have their will treat their spouse's kids as if they were their natural children, is that ever?
I don't love that. I would use names. Names are much less confusing than classes. And I'd also want to make sure, if you're talking about gift overs to my issue or things like that, be very careful about that. Sure, there are many different ways to draft it, where you say my children means A, B, C, and D, even though C and D are not my children. I mean, I think that's would work. But my preference is to name people specifically.
Okay, thank you.
I see there's a question. Can you touch upon Henson trusts? Sure. Are there any other questions about macros or ePlans? And then I'll talk about, in the last couple of minutes, about Henson Trust, which is its own topic, but I'm happy to show that. So the first thing to know about, but actually before I get to that, I do want to show one feature that you might not be aware of. If you're doing mirror wills for clients and you're not sure if everything matches, there's this button, the arrows pointing towards one another, that's a spouse compare button. And what that did is it looked at everything and it saw, were there things that weren't matching? So the estate trustees matched, the guardians matched, provisions didn't match. One of the spouses included future children, one of them didn't, okay? So you can go back in and change that. The scenarios were different. Yes, the surviving spouse scenario was correct, but the balance of estate in segment 1 was different with the payout, okay? And similarly, in no descendants, the balance of the estate, one client had 3 segments, right? The charity gift, and the others only had 2. Well, eState's going to see that matches or doesn't match, and identifies it. So before I'm finalized anything, I always do, especially when, if I'm only if I'm acting for spouses with mirror wills, will I check to make sure, oh, there are no differences that I'm not expecting. Okay. So that's a great feature that I created basically for myself, because I was always thinking, oh, this didn't come out the same. They have difference. There's a difference. I forgot there was a difference. This will automatically check for that. Okay. Very quickly, sorry, and we can do a whole topic on Henson Trust. But one of the things that you can always do is, if you click the question mark up here and type in Henson Trusts, there's this section about how to create a Henson Trust. And basically, it will look for a disabled beneficiary. So that is a person who's been marked off as disabled. So John Simpson, for example. John Simpson, if we went to John Simpson, we would see that in special circumstances, he's got a disability. If we created a trust for John Simpson, we can create a Henson Trust for John Simpson, and it'll put in the wording. How do we do that? Well, I'll just demonstrate. So pretend this segment, let's just change this for a second, was John Simpson, okay? So we're creating a Henson Trust for John Simpson. He's incapable. Great. We're going to do a trust. Okay. We're going to do a duration, which is death. Okay. We're going to make sure there are no mandatory payments. That's a Henson Trust. We're going to make unlimited discretionary payments. And we're going to have a gift over, let's say, to the other beneficiaries in other residuary beneficiaries. That would qualify as a Henson Trust, right? Because we have a disabled beneficiary. It's in a trust for the death of till the death of the beneficiary with no mandatory payments. So once I do that, if I went to, let's just regenerate this will, and I'll show you what the wording does. So down here, I bet you, yes. So we have a Henson Trust for John. If John's alive, set it aside, held until the death, net income, they can pay it to John, or they can accumulate it. And because of accumulation, 21 years, we don't want it mandatorily paid out to John. So we need to put in some extra language in there. And it'll include all the typical language for a Henson Trust automatically. Okay. So and if you want more help, if you want to spend a couple minutes with Michaela, she's an expert in doing Henson Trusts in eState. You can also, like I said, go into the help desk and look, and it does a step-by-step, and there's an interactive webinar on Henson Trusts in eState. So we have lots of resources there, and I hope that, Lucy, I hope that is helpful and happy. Like I said, if you just want further information, feel free to reach out to us through support, and we'll do a more extensive one later. All right. 2 minutes. So yeah, so just remind everybody on here, especially new people, this question mark is how you get in touch with us. You can search for help, you can live chat, and that will bring us to your live chat down here. And you can say, I need help with Henson Trust. And Michaela or one of our support people, or me, we'll jump on and we'll Zoom and we'll show you exactly how to do it. All right. So just a reminder that this week we don't have a Thursday webinar, and that's because it's the 6-Minute Lawyer. So because the 6-Minute Lawyer is going on in the Law Society, we decided not to have one because Ian's tied up, I'm tied up, and so. But we'll see you again next Thursday, a week this Thursday. Thanks, everybody, and appreciate all your support, and hope to see you guys again. Have a great rest of the week.